Good afternoon and welcome. This was a useful European Council, not a groundbreaking council in any way, but useful, some good progress made. I was going to mention three areas in particular. First of all, when I came here, I said it's important we make progress on this issue of winning in the global race. Secondly, the progress on the Eurozone and the banking union. And third, just a word about international priorities such as Syria and Iran. In terms of the global race issues, I said we needed to make progress on completing the single market, Europe's greatest asset. We need to make progress on deregulating and helping our businesses compete and succeed. And also we need to make progress on doing these trade deals as the European Union with the fastest growing countries in the world and also with the biggest economies in the world. Now, I think we've made progress on all three of these. Starting with the trade deals, the EU-Japan trade deal, the idea of that deal is mentioned in the conclusions, and it talks about starting negotiations in the coming months. I think that's good progress, and I'm pleased with that. We hope to start EU-US trade deal talks in next year. Also, we're getting close to completing the Canadian and Singaporean talks in the coming months. And this agenda, really, if you put it all together, is worth something like 2 million jobs to the EU. So I think that is useful progress. On deregulation, I'm well aware that British Prime Ministers have talked about getting Europe to deregulate for many years, and it's often a hope rather than an achievement. But I would draw your attention to a sort of Anglo-German proposal, if you like, that is in the conclusions that says this: taking account of the particular priority to foster competitiveness, the European Council welcomes the Commission's intention to withdraw a number of pending proposals and to identify possible areas where the regulatory burden could be lightened. Now, it's not often the Commission talks about withdrawing pending proposals or identifying areas where the burden could be lightened. I think that is progress, and Angela Merkel and I worked together to achieve that. On completing the single market, I've mentioned many times standing right here or in the House of Commons the importance of making progress on energy, on digital, on services. I think what's encouraging is both in the conclusions text but also in the document that's been issued with the Growth Compact, is there's a proper action plan with dates and actions on energy, on digital, on services. And I think that's been a real achievement of the last year, to try and take these agendas that we all know are worth a lot to the British economy, but also other European economies, and actually have a proper programme for delivering them. So I'm pleased about that. The next issue I mentioned was obviously the Eurozone. This was what took up most of the time last night, the discussion of the Eurozone and banking union. As you know, we're not in the Eurozone, we're not going to be joining the Eurozone, but we do want the Eurozone to work. And for my part, I think a working Eurozone needs a working banking union, and this needs to be done. So we are encouraging Eurozone countries to go ahead with a banking union and make sure it works properly. We have to address the issue of how we maintain the integrity of the single market if you have a banking union that not all countries are involved in, and obviously Britain wouldn't be involved in the banking union. For me, the banking union flows from the single currency. That's why you need a banking union. You don't need a banking union because you have a single market. You need it because you have a single currency. So we do need to address the issue of how you maintain the integrity of the single market. And the conclusions refer very clearly to that in paragraph 8, for anyone who follows these things very closely. Third and last, on the international issues, the language on Syria and Iran, I think, is important. On Syria, we're talking about additional restrictive measures on the regime, and I think it's good that the European Union has shown such purpose and drive and unanimity on this, and Britain's played a key part in helping to bring that about. And also on Iran, I think it is, again, notable not only that the EU has managed to put in place this oil embargo that is having an impact, and I spoke about that earlier this week, but also the language in the conclusion says that, look, if there isn't progress on the nuclear dossier, we will increase the pressure. And I think that is very important to have that reference. But as I said, I'm not standing here saying that we have made the dramatic breakthrough in solving all of the EU or Eurozone's problems, but I think some good progress on those issues that I've mentioned. Happy to take some questions. ITN.
Prime Minister, what do you say to the Finnish Foreign Minister's view that Britain is currently saying bye-bye to Europe?
Well, I just don't accept that is the case. As you've heard there, we are a very active and strong participant in the European Union. I mean, yes, we are a country that is sceptical about further political union in the EU. There are some powers we'd like to have back. We're realists about the EU. We have a sort of realistic, gritty debate. That's what we're like as a people, and I think that's a thoroughly good thing. But when you ask yourself, who actually is, pulling the weight in Europe, getting things done? Which are the countries that are piling on the pressure on Iran and making sure everyone follows with that? Britain is right there in the vanguard. Who is tightening the noose around the Assad regime and making sure the EU is tightening its restrictions? It's the British that are doing it. On the single market, the biggest asset Europe has got, a market of 400 million consumers. Which is the country that's saying, right, come on, let's set a date for completing the energy market, completing the digital market, completing the services market? Who's driving that agenda, which has made so much progress this year? It's Britain. So I don't accept that for a minute. Am I happy with the status quo in Europe? No, I'm not. I think there are changes that we need. I think as the Eurozone develops and integrates, which is bound to happen, I think there are opportunities opening up for what I've said should be a new settlement between Britain and Europe, and there'll be opportunities, I think, to seek that new settlement and then get fresh consent for that settlement, and I'm keen to do that. But I don't accept this idea that somehow Britain doesn't pull its weight in the EU. We are actually a very, very important and influential player. And, if you look at the text of today's conclusions, for instance, so much of it is actually about what Britain wants on the single market and deregulation and some of the things I mentioned in my discussions. I obviously commiserated with my Finnish colleague that they hadn't made it onto the UN Security Council because Britain and Finland have a very close relationship. We work very closely together and we're good allies on a lot of these topics. Gary Gibbon.
Do you agree with several of your cabinet ministers that Britain could survive perfectly well outside the EU?
Well, it's not a question of whether Britain could survive. The point is what is in our national interests. And I've always been clear that leaving the European Union is not in our national interest. Why? Well, chiefly because we are a trading nation. We need Europe's markets to be open. The EU accounts for around 50% of our trade, and having those markets open means that we don't just want to be able to trade with Europe, we want to say over the rules about how that trade works, and that's exactly what our EU membership gives us. But I think it's a sort of false choice between saying, you can either accept the status quo or you've got to leave. I think the whole point is that's not where the British public is, that's not where I am. I think what we should be seeking, as Europe changes, as the Eurozone integrates, we should be saying there are opportunities for a fresh settlement and then to get fresh consent for that settlement to get the best possible deal for Britain. That's what I'm about.
What assurances have you had that European partners are willing to let you negotiate a fresh settlement? When we talk to any of the other European partners, they say certainly not. We're not going to let him unpick all the treaties.
No, of course, you've got the situation today. What have we been here discussing? We're here discussing, if you like, a fresh settlement for the Eurozone. Right? We've been discussing banking union. Right? That is a fresh settlement for the Eurozone. They want to have, I would argue, they need to have a big, comprehensive banking union. We know a little bit about this. We have a single currency. It's called the pound. We have 4 nations that use that single currency. And we have a banking union. If a bank goes bust in Northern Ireland or Scotland, we have proper resolution regimes. We have proper deposit guarantees. We have a banking union. They need a banking union. That is, if you like, part of their fresh settlement. So I don't accept that the EU, as it is just sort of fixed and stuck in one track. It is changing. And you can see how it's changing right now with the Eurozone having to integrate more quickly. The two things we've been discussing, or two of the things we've been discussing in the last day or so, and night and early morning, the European budget, obviously that's for November, but this whole idea that the Eurozone might need to have a separate budget that's now on the table, that's a massive change. That's a new settlement. That's the sort of sign of change to come. This whole issue of banking union and how you safeguard properly the single market if the countries of the Eurozone go ahead into a banking union. Again, this is about the plates of Europe are moving and changing, and the right thing for Britain to do is to say what's in our national interest. And I would argue it's to be at the heart of the single market, that's absolutely key, but to say yes, just as the Eurozone is changing, and there are fresh settlements there, so there are fresh opportunities for Britain as well. BBC. Gavin.
Prime Minister, it's not just the Finnish Europe Minister who has questioned whether Britain is now pulling back from Europe. We also had this week the French President who said Britain now seems to be more in retreat. Are you happy with this reputation, which seems to be gaining ground, that we are loosening our ties and pulling back?
Look, I have a reputation for being frank and plain speaking in Europe. You know, if I don't like something, I say so. When we were here last December and everyone wanted a treaty and said this is absolutely essential, we have an EU treaty and there wasn't safeguards for Britain, I said, no, I'm not having it. I'm vetoing the treaty. You can go ahead outside the EU, but you're not having a treaty. Now, you know, everyone has to defend their national interest. And yes, I have a reputation, I think, probably for being quite outspoken, for being pretty tough and defending Britain's interest. But that, as far as I'm concerned, is my job. And so what matters is, are we getting a good deal for Britain? Not what is everyone else saying about you. Right? Now, I would argue we're getting a very good deal for Britain. What have we achieved as a government over the last 2 years? We were in bailout mechanisms for the euro. We've got out of those bailout mechanisms. I think that was a very good outcome for Britain. It was tough, it was difficult, but we did it. Last year, we said we don't want to see an increase in the European budget. We got a real terms freeze in the European budget. It was tough, it was difficult, it was good for Britain. Here, we want to have safeguards and protections for the single market over the banking union, and you can see language in there. Again, tough, difficult, means you're here till 3 o'clock in the morning, but we've got that language in the conclusions. That is what Britain should be doing, but it's not a negative vision. There are parts of Europe where we're far more engaged than anybody else. You know, when it comes to completing the digital and the energy single markets and the services single markets, you know, it's some of what you'd see as the classic European players who are in the back room, taking a lot of time. You know, it's on those things. It's some of the other larger European countries were the ones pushing forward and saying, come on, we've signed up to a single market. It's having its 20th birthday this week. Let's finish it. And others are saying, no, we mustn't go too quickly. Well, in those areas, we want some more action. So, you know, what matters is what you do, not what others say about it. And so one shouldn't be defensive about these things. Graham.
Graham Wilson from The Sun. Are you ready to be tough next month and to use your veto to stop a deal on the budget, which is not in the interest of the British taxpayer?
The short answer to that is yes. I mean, look, I think it would be good to have a deal. It's good to settle these issues. But it just would not be acceptable to see, you know, some huge increase in EU spending at a time when other budgets are being cut. And so the British public expect a tough approach, a rigorous approach, and that's exactly what they'll get. And if we can't get a deal, you know, there's no point doing a deal that's a bad deal. So if there isn't a deal that's good for Britain, if there isn't a deal that's available, then there won't be a deal. But I think it's you know, that's what we should be focusing on, making sure we protect the British rebate. That's absolutely vital, and making sure that European spending, and we can't have European spending going up and up and up when we're having to make difficult decisions in so many different areas. Having said that, there's plenty that the European budget already does and can do more of. You know, there are, my favourite figure for the day, I think there are 16% of employees in the European Commission who earn over 100,000 euros. Now, what we've done in Britain, we have cracked down on the central administration, on the costs of Whitehall, on the numbers of people employed to release money for things that are more important. And we need to see in the budget proposals that sort of rigorous approach. So there is a deal that can be done, but it can't be a deal that involves spending a lot more money. The Guardian. Patrick.
Thank you very much. Could I ask whether you think the opportunity of a Eurozone budget would mean that Britain could contribute less to the main budget? And secondly, will you be going on behalf of the British people to accept the Nobel Peace Prize?
On the Nobel Peace Prize, look, I think it is, you know, it's an achievement not just of the European Union, I would argue NATO as well, that these institutions have helped to bring about peace on the continent of Europe and for all of us over the last 60 years. And that's important. It's an important thing to recognise as one of the strong cases for these institutions of NATO and the EU. I think 3 of the possible 5 European presidents are going to Oslo. I'm sure, and my suggestion was that we should, a school child from each of the 27 countries should go. I thought there'd be something that they would always remember and a great symbol of Europe's future. So that's a suggestion that's on the table. I personally won't be going, but I'm sure there'll be enough people to collect the prize. Oh, sorry. Yes, I've forgotten the other one. It was, yes, so the Eurozone budget. Look, the good thing about this is the idea is on the table, and I think that's important because Europe is changing. And I think the idea of the Eurozone having a budget is a worthwhile idea to explore. You know, I come back, if you have a single currency, like we have in the UK, you need to have the things that go with a single currency, and that is banking unions and elements of fiscal unions and offsets between different parts of the country or in this case, the Eurozone members. So I think it is a good idea. It obviously, over time, would affect the way that Europe's budgets work. I don't think you can argue there would be absolutely no relation ever between a Eurozone budget over here and an EU budget over there. I think that would be a very odd position to take. There was quite a battle about this, and I secured the point that you know, the process of looking at a European budget and the process of drawing up the negotiations for the MFF, of course, those are separate. Some people wanted to go further and say we could never talk about what the impacts might be. That would clearly be wrong. There would be an impact, in my view. If you have a Eurozone budget, there'd be an impact on the EU budget. But this is one of the arguments that is, I think, showing so persuasively that there are opportunities, just as there is for a new settlement for the Eurozone countries, a new settlement for Britain too. Last couple of questions. One more from the BBC. Ian?
Okay, sorry, Ian Watson from BBC. Following up on Patrick's point, as you said, there's no major breakthrough at this conference. So when we're looking forward to the budget next month, is it the case that you believe Britain can actually pay less because of these discussions on a separate Eurozone budget? Or do you think overall there should be a freeze in the EU budget or both? And secondly, sorry, a domestic question, but it looks as though there's another MP's expenses scandal brewing with some people trying to get around the more stringent rules that have been imposed. Are you disappointed and does it need to be cleaned up?
Well, first of all, on the European budget, look, I'm not going to give you my entire negotiating strategy, disappointing as I'm sure you'll find that. But I mean, suffice it to say, we'll be taking a very tough approach. You know, I've not put in place in Britain some very tough budget settlements on policing, on justice, on social security, you know, in order to come and just sign away big increases in European spending and the consequences for Britain. That is not going to happen. So we'll be taking a tough approach, and I think that is important. Obviously, even before the multi-annual financial framework starts, we've still got, you know, another budget that needs to be fixed, but as you know, that's voted on QMV rather than unanimity, whereas the multi-annual framework is unanimous. On MPs' expenses, look, we set up, or rather the last government set up, you know, an entirely independent body, IPSA, to deal with this issue because we wanted, and I agree with this, to get away from the idea that MPs voted on these things or had influence over these things. And if people do have complaints, people have concerns, they should take them to IPSA. Transparency should clearly be at the heart of the system, but we must let IPSA get on with the job of policing properly the MP's expenses regime. I think last one, and then we've got one here.
Alex Barker, Financial Times. I'm wondering how far you're willing to go in the banking union negotiation to secure your interests, even at the risk of slowing down the Eurozone and doing the things you say are necessary. And did you say that you wouldn't sign up to things like capital rules, which are also part of the banking union package, until you have assurances that you've got what you want on voting and EBA?
Well, I think we have a very simple approach, which is, you know, the single currency needs a banking union. We don't want to stand in the way of that. Indeed, we think a successful single currency will need that to happen. Remember, it's going ahead on a treaty base that requires unanimity. So, you know, although we're not going to be in this banking union, our agreement is necessary before it goes ahead. I want it to go ahead, but we do have this one particular issue about how we make sure the single market's integrity is protected. In paragraph 8 of the conclusions, it says an acceptable and balanced solution is needed regarding changes to voting modalities and decisions under the European Banking Authority regulation, that ensures non-discriminatory and effective decision-making within the single market. I know that's all a lot of jargon, but you will understand, working for the FT, of course, that this says we want to go ahead with banking union. We know there's an important issue of protecting the integrity of the single market. We know that those who will be outside the banking union have these concerns that need to be addressed, and I'm sure they can be addressed, and we'll be working very hard with the Commission and others in the run-up to the December Council to make sure this is dealt with in a proper way. We don't want to stand in the way of a proper banking union, but I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm a Prime Minister of the country that has, 40% of Europe's financial services industries. This is not just a massive and important industry for Britain, it's actually a massive and important industry for the European Union as well. And we need to make sure that the single market is properly looked after in terms of its integrity. Thank you very much. We've got one more of these in November and then another one in December, so we won't be, no danger of not seeing each other. Thank you very much.